In 2012, on a warm spring morning in Savannah, Georgia, the calm of a quiet residential neighborhood was shattered by an urgent call to 911 at precisely 7:34 a.m. The caller, a distraught woman, identified herself as Elizabeth Grayson. Her panicked voice was nearly incomprehensible as she reported that her husband, Martin Grayson, was lying lifeless in their garage. First responders were dispatched immediately to the address, a large, well-maintained property on the outskirts of the city. Upon arrival, the paramedics and police officers were met with a grim scene. Martin Grayson, a prominent local pastor, was found sprawled on the cold concrete floor of the garage, his body positioned unnaturally. His left arm was bent beneath him, and faint abrasions were visible on his hands and forearms, as though he had fallen or struggled before losing consciousness. A faint trace of blood was noted on his lower lip, and his eyes remained partially open, staring blankly upward. There were no obvious signs of forced entry or foul play at first glance, but the circumstances raised immediate questions. The garage was meticulously organized, a reflection of the disciplined lifestyle Martin was known for. His black luxury sedan was parked neatly in its designated space, and a set of golf clubs rested against the far wall. Nearby, a workbench held neatly arranged tools, none appearing disturbed. Yet, something about the scene felt off to the investigators. The position of the body and the minor injuries did not align with a simple medical emergency. The attending paramedics pronounced Martin dead at the scene, prompting the police to secure the area for a formal investigation. The lead investigator, Detective Raymond Holloway, arrived shortly after the initial response team. A seasoned officer with over 2 decades of experience, Holloway quickly noted inconsistencies. While the preliminary assumption was a heart attack, the abrasions on Martin's hands suggested an element of physical activity or resistance. Furthermore, the faint scent of cleaning chemicals lingered in the air, an unusual detail given the otherwise pristine condition of the space. As the investigation proceeded, Elizabeth Grayson was questioned by officers in the living room of the house. Still in shock, she recounted discovering her husband's body less than an hour earlier. According to her, Martin had left their bedroom early that morning, something he occasionally did to prepare for his day or to spend time alone in reflection and prayer. When he failed to return for breakfast, Elizabeth had gone to look for him, eventually finding him in the garage. Elizabeth's account of the events painted a picture of a loving, devoted husband and community leader. She described Martin as a disciplined man who took his health seriously, making the notion of a sudden heart attack all the more surprising. Her tears were genuine, but her responses hinted at an undercurrent of anxiety beyond grief, a detail noted by Detective Holloway. Martin Grayson was a man of prominence in Savannah. Born in 1971 in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, he had risen to prominence through sheer determination and an unshakable faith. As a young man, Martin displayed a natural charisma and intelligence that set him apart from his peers. He graduated with honors from a prestigious theological seminary, earning accolades for his oratory skills and deep understanding of Scripture. By his mid-30s, Martin had become the senior pastor of the Savannah Baptist Cathedral, one of the city's largest and most influential churches. Martin was more than a religious leader, he was a community figure. His sermons regularly attracted thousands, and his philanthropic efforts extended to establishing food drives, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and rehabilitation programs for former inmates. To many, Martin was the embodiment of moral and spiritual leadership, a man who had seemingly achieved the perfect balance of personal and professional fulfillment. Elizabeth Grayson, his wife of 10 years, had been an integral part of his journey. Born in 1975 in rural Georgia, Elizabeth had faced her own share of challenges. Orphaned at a young age, she was raised by a strict yet caring grandmother who instilled in her a sense of resilience and ambition. Elizabeth excelled academically, earning a law degree before meeting Martin at a charity gala. Their courtship was swift and deeply romantic, with Martin's steadfast commitment to faith complementing Elizabeth's practical and grounded nature. Their marriage was widely regarded as a partnership of equals, each supporting the other in their respective endeavors. Elizabeth had put her legal career on hold to focus on family life, a decision she later described as fulfilling but challenging. Together, they raised Elizabeth's son from a previous relationship, Jason, now 19, whom Martin had embraced as his own. The discovery of Martin's body sent shockwaves through the community. News of the pastor's sudden death spread rapidly, drawing reporters and curious onlookers to the Grayson home. Inside, investigators began a painstaking examination of the garage, photographing every angle and collecting samples for forensic analysis. The autopsy, they hoped, would provide answers, but the evidence on the scene suggested that this case would be far from straightforward. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the garage was cordoned off with crime scene tape, marking the beginning of an investigation that would unravel secrets buried deep within the seemingly perfect life of Martin Grayson. For now, his death remained a mystery, but Detective Holloway knew one thing for certain: appearances could be deceiving, and every detail mattered. Before marrying Martin Grayson, Elizabeth was a single mother raising her son, Jason, on her own. At the time of their marriage, Jason was 9 years old, a bright and spirited child with an aptitude for academics and an interest in creative pursuits. Elizabeth often described him as mature for his age, a boy who displayed sensitivity and intelligence far beyond his years. Jason's natural talents were evident early on. He excelled in school, showing a particular affinity for mathematics and design, which led to his dream of becoming an architect. He balanced his academic achievements with an active interest in music, playing the piano, and participating in his school's basketball team. When Martin entered their lives, he quickly assumed the role of a father figure. Despite never having children of his own, Martin embraced the responsibilities of parenting with enthusiasm and commitment. He encouraged Jason's interests, attended school functions, and often took him to church activities. By all appearances, Martin treated Jason as his own son, and their bond grew naturally over time. Neighbors and friends frequently commented on the harmonious dynamic within the Grayson household, describing them as a model family. Jason, in turn, respected Martin and seemed to enjoy the stability and guidance he provided. For a time, their relationship was unremarkable in the best sense, marked by mutual respect and a shared routine. Jason admired Martin's discipline and community presence, while Martin saw in Jason a bright future and the opportunity to instill his values in the younger generation. They frequently worked on small projects together, like assembling model buildings or fixing things around the house, further strengthening their connection. However, as Jason grew older, the dynamics began to shift subtly. By the time he turned 16, Jason's personality had evolved, and he began to exhibit traits of independence and self-assurance that often accompany adolescence. His physical appearance also changed. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that did not go unnoticed. Martin began to notice these changes, and while on the surface his behavior remained supportive and fatherly, there were moments when his attention lingered on Jason in ways that unsettled him. Martin's observations of Jason became more frequent and introspective. He would sometimes find himself watching the boy during casual family moments, noticing details that he could not explain or rationalize. The way Jason interacted with others, his charm, his easy smile, his natural charisma, seemed to capture Martin's attention more than he cared to admit. Martin dismissed these thoughts as a byproduct of his role as a stepfather, interpreting them as concern for Jason's well-being and future. Still, a growing discomfort lingered, as though a boundary was being tested, even if only in Martin's mind. From Jason's perspective, his relationship with Martin remained largely unchanged during this period. He appreciated Martin's involvement in his life and seemed oblivious to the internal conflict his stepfather was experiencing. Jason continued to thrive academically, earning high marks in school and gaining early recognition for his architectural sketches, which he often showed to Martin for feedback. He also maintained his passion for music, practicing piano in the evenings and occasionally performing at church events, where Martin's pride in him was evident. Yet, there were moments of tension that neither of them fully acknowledged. Martin's demeanor occasionally shifted in Jason's presence, becoming quieter, more pensive. Elizabeth noticed these subtle changes but attributed them to the stress of Martin's demanding role as a pastor. She remained unaware of the complexities brewing beneath the surface, interpreting their interactions as the natural evolution of a stepfather-son relationship. The outward harmony of the Grayson household masked these undercurrents, creating a veneer of normalcy that would eventually begin to crack. The strength of their bond, once unquestionable, now carried a weight that neither Martin nor Jason could fully articulate. Their shared history and mutual respect held them together, but beneath it all, something intangible began to grow, a tension that would later reveal itself in unexpected and irrevocable ways. For now, the Grayson family continued their daily lives, unaware of the storm quietly brewing within their seemingly idyllic world. In the summer of 2012, Martin Grayson suggested to Jason that they take a weekend fishing trip to a secluded lake just outside Savannah, Georgia. The plan seemed innocuous, even wholesome, a chance for them to bond away from the responsibilities and distractions of daily life. For Jason, it was an opportunity to enjoy nature and spend time with his stepfather, who had been increasingly supportive of his interests. For Martin, it was an opportunity to strengthen their relationship under the guise of mentorship. Elizabeth, unaware of any underlying tensions, encouraged the trip, delighted by the apparent camaraderie between her husband and her son. The destination was a small, remote lake nestled in a wooded area about 50 miles from the city. Known for its serene beauty, the site was popular among locals for camping and fishing. Martin and Jason arrived late on a Friday afternoon, parking their truck near the lake's edge and setting up a modest campsite. The equipment included a small tent, 2 fishing rods, a cooler filled with supplies, and a portable grill for cooking their catch. The weather was ideal, clear skies with a light breeze, casting a golden glow over the rippling water. That evening, they sat side by side on the lake's shore, their fishing lines cast into the water. The quietness of the surroundings was interrupted only by the occasional chirping of crickets and the distant rustle of leaves. Martin, typically composed and confident, appeared uncharacteristically introspective. He frequently glanced at Jason, whose relaxed demeanor contrasted with the unease that Martin was trying to suppress. Jason, oblivious to the complexity of Martin's thoughts, chatted casually about school, his architectural ambitions, and his recent piano recital. Martin listened attentively, occasionally nodding, but his responses grew increasingly curt as the evening wore on. As night fell, the two retreated to their tent. The confined space and the intimacy of their environment heightened the tension that had been simmering throughout the day. The tent was small, with barely enough room for the 2 sleeping bags laid side by side. The air was thick with the smell of pine and the faint remnants of smoke from their earlier campfire. Jason, tired from the day's activities, settled into his sleeping bag, unaware of the internal conflict raging within Martin. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the faint hum of nocturnal insects outside. The turning point came when Martin, unable to contain his emotions, acted on an impulse that had been building for months. He leaned over and kissed Jason, a gesture that crossed every boundary of their relationship. Jason, initially stunned, did not pull away. Instead, he reciprocated, an act that signaled his own confusion and curiosity about the situation. What followed was a night that irrevocably changed the nature of their bond. The next morning, the tension between them had dissipated, replaced by a strange and unspoken understanding. They packed up their campsite in near silence, avoiding direct eye contact but exchanging occasional glances that hinted at the gravity of what had occurred. Martin appeared calm, even serene, as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Jason, while quieter than usual, seemed contemplative rather than distressed. Upon their return home, Elizabeth greeted them warmly, delighted to see her husband and son appearing closer than ever. She commented on how the trip had clearly been a success, noting the ease and camaraderie in their interactions. Martin and Jason played along, their shared secret remaining buried beneath layers of practiced normalcy. To Elizabeth, the fishing trip was a triumph, a bonding experience that reinforced the strength of their family. She had no way of knowing that the weekend had marked the beginning of a clandestine relationship that would later unravel their lives. For now, the Grayson household returned to its usual rhythm, the events of the fishing trip concealed behind the polished facade of their seemingly perfect family dynamic. Following their return from the fishing trip, Martin and Jason's relationship took on an entirely new dynamic. What had once been a conventional stepfather-stepson bond was now complicated by an intimacy they both went to great lengths to conceal. Their shared secret became a silent agreement, one that demanded vigilance and subtlety to avoid detection. This secrecy created a charged atmosphere within the Grayson household, though Elizabeth remained unaware of the growing tension. At family dinners, their interactions were marked by fleeting glances and unspoken communication. Jason, usually animated and conversational, became more reserved, often catching Martin's eye across the table. Martin, typically composed and articulate, seemed distracted, his responses to Elizabeth's questions sometimes delayed or absent altogether. While their behavior might have seemed innocuous to an outsider, it was clear to those who knew them well that something had shifted. Their moments of connection were carefully orchestrated. Martin would create opportunities for them to be alone, whether under the pretense of helping Jason with a project or discussing church activities. These interactions were brief and calculated, with both parties acutely aware of the need for discretion. Late at night, when the rest of the household was asleep, they would exchange text messages, their conversations laced with coded language and references only they understood. These moments of connection sustained their relationship, but the constant need for secrecy began to take its toll. Martin's behavior outside the home also began to change. He started attending more meetings and spending longer hours at the church. While these absences were easily explained as the demands of his role as pastor, they became more frequent and irregular. Elizabeth, initially supportive of her husband's dedication, began to grow suspicious. She noticed subtle inconsistencies in his explanations and a detachment in his demeanor that was uncharacteristic of the attentive and engaged partner she had married. Jason, too, began to struggle with the weight of their secret. Though he continued to excel academically, his focus waned. Teachers noted a drop in his usual enthusiasm, and friends commented on his increasing withdrawal from social activities. At home, he spent more time in his room, avoiding unnecessary interactions with Elizabeth to minimize the risk of revealing their secret. The once lively and open dynamic between mother and son became strained, though Elizabeth attributed this to typical teenage mood swings. Tension in the household began to escalate as Elizabeth's suspicions grew. She started questioning Martin more directly about his late nights and frequent absences. His responses, while measured and logical, failed to fully assuage her concerns. She also noticed subtle changes in Jason's behavior, such as his reluctance to spend time with her and his tendency to avoid conversations about Martin. These observations, though disjointed, planted seeds of doubt in Elizabeth's mind. Outside the home, Martin worked to maintain his reputation as a dedicated spiritual leader. His sermons continued to draw large crowds, and his involvement in community initiatives remained unwavering. However, those closest to him began to notice signs of strain. He seemed more preoccupied, occasionally losing his train of thought during meetings and appearing less engaged in casual interactions. His inner turmoil, though well hidden, began to seep through the cracks of his polished exterior. The secrecy of their relationship demanded constant vigilance, and the pressure began to affect both Martin and Jason in different ways. For Martin, the duplicity clashed with the moral values he had built his life around, creating a growing sense of guilt and self-loathing. For Jason, the secrecy isolated him from his peers and family, leaving him with a sense of confusion and vulnerability. The weight of their secret created an invisible barrier within the Grayson household, one that Elizabeth could sense but not yet fully understand. As the weeks turned into months, the fragile equilibrium of their lives became increasingly unsustainable. Martin and Jason's clandestine relationship, though carefully concealed, began to leave traces, subtle shifts in behavior, unexplained absences, and moments of tension that hinted at deeper fractures within their seemingly perfect family. These cracks would eventually widen, leading to a series of events that would shatter the Grayson household and expose the truth they had worked so hard to hide. For now, however, the secret remained intact, a shadow looming over their lives, waiting for the moment it would come to light. On a humid morning in late summer, Elizabeth Grayson awoke earlier than usual, her routine disrupted by a sense of unease she couldn't explain. The house was unusually silent, and Martin, who typically prepared coffee before heading out for his day, was nowhere to be seen. Assuming he might have gone to the garage to retrieve something, Elizabeth decided to look for him. As she approached the garage door, she noticed it was slightly ajar, an unusual detail that only heightened her growing apprehension. Stepping inside, she was immediately struck by the scene before her. Martin was lying on the cold cement floor, motionless. His arms were splayed awkwardly, one tucked beneath his torso, the other extended toward the nearby workbench. His face was partially turned to one side, revealing a faint trail of dried blood from his nose and mouth. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and his normally composed expression was replaced with one of frozen anguish. Elizabeth's first reaction was panic. She rushed to his side, shaking him and calling his name, but there was no response. His body was cold to the touch, and she noticed faint abrasions on his hands and wrists, as though he had struggled or fallen before losing consciousness. Nearby, a toolbox had been knocked over, its contents scattered across the floor. A small smear of blood marked the edge of the workbench, and a faint chemical odor lingered in the air. Frantic, Elizabeth called 911, her voice trembling as she reported her husband's condition. Within minutes, paramedics and police officers arrived, their presence shattering the eerie stillness of the morning. The paramedics confirmed what Elizabeth had already feared: Martin was dead. They noted his injuries, though minor, and his unnatural position, which suggested that his death had not been immediate or peaceful. Detective Raymond Holloway, who had recently been assigned to the case, arrived shortly after the initial responders. Holloway was a seasoned investigator, known for his methodical approach and keen attention to detail. As he surveyed the scene, several inconsistencies caught his attention. While the abrasions on Martin's hands could be explained by a fall, the small bloodstains and the scattered tools indicated a possible struggle. The chemical odor, faint but distinct, also raised questions about whether something had been spilled or used to clean part of the scene. The garage itself was meticulously organized, a reflection of Martin's disciplined nature. Tools were neatly arranged on the workbench, except for those that had fallen, and the floor was unusually clean for a workspace. However, Holloway noticed subtle disturbances, a slight smudge on the edge of the workbench that could have been made by a hand or object, and a faint trail of scuff marks leading toward the garage door, as though someone had dragged their feet. Elizabeth, still in shock, was escorted to the living room for questioning. She recounted finding Martin and insisted that he had no known health issues that could explain his sudden death. She also mentioned that Martin had been working late nights recently, though she had no reason to believe he was under any unusual stress. Her account, while emotional, offered little clarity about the circumstances leading to Martin's death. Back in the garage, the forensic team began their work. They collected samples of the bloodstains and photographed every detail of the scene, from the scattered tools to the smudges and scuff marks. An initial examination of Martin's body revealed no immediately fatal injuries, though the blood at the scene suggested some degree of trauma. The chemical odor was traced to a small, half-empty bottle of cleaning solvent on a nearby shelf, though its relevance to the case remained unclear. As news of Martin's death spread, the community was shocked. Martin was a beloved pastor and public figure, known for his dedication to his church and his charitable work. His sudden death, especially under circumstances that appeared suspicious, sent ripples of grief and speculation through Savannah. Friends and congregants gathered outside the Grayson home, offering support to Elizabeth and Jason, who had remained upstairs during the commotion. For Detective Holloway, the case was anything but straightforward. While there were no clear signs of foul play, the inconsistencies at the scene suggested that Martin's death might not have been accidental or natural. The abrasions, the blood, and the chemical odor all pointed to the possibility of a struggle or an attempt to alter the scene. With no immediate witnesses or suspects, the investigation would rely heavily on forensic analysis and a closer examination of Martin's personal and professional life. As the forensic team packed up their equipment and Martin's body was transported for autopsy, Holloway lingered in the garage, reviewing his notes. He couldn't shake the feeling that the truth behind Martin's death lay hidden in the seemingly mundane details of the scene. For now, the cause of death remained a mystery, but Holloway was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply buried it might be. The investigation into Martin Grayson's death began immediately after the initial scene examination. Detective Raymond Holloway led a team of investigators tasked with piecing together the events leading to the pastor's mysterious demise. With no witnesses and only circumstantial evidence at the scene, the case relied heavily on interviews, forensic analysis, and the reconstruction of Martin's final days. The high-profile nature of the case added pressure, as Martin was a respected figure in the Savannah community, and his death had drawn significant public attention. Holloway's first step was to interview the immediate family. Elizabeth Grayson provided a detailed account of her discovery of Martin's body but could offer little insight into potential motives or suspects. Jason, visibly shaken, claimed he had been asleep when his stepfather died and had no knowledge of any conflicts or unusual behavior. Their statements, while consistent, left many questions unanswered. Next, the police turned their attention to Martin's professional life. As a prominent pastor, Martin had extensive connections within the community. Investigators began by interviewing members of his congregation, focusing on those who had regular interactions with him. One of the first names to surface was Walter Bishop, a longtime church member who had recently expressed dissatisfaction with Martin's handling of church finances. According to other congregants, Walter had accused Martin of mismanaging funds allocated for a community outreach program. The dispute had escalated to the point where Walter had confronted Martin publicly, making vague threats about exposing his secrets. Walter was brought in for questioning. He admitted to the confrontation but denied any involvement in Martin's death. Investigators found his alibi credible. On the night before the body was discovered, Walter had been at home hosting a gathering with friends, several of whom corroborated his story. While his threats had raised suspicion, there was no evidence linking him to the scene. This lead, though promising, ultimately proved to be a dead end. Holloway then shifted focus to Martin's personal life, looking for clues that might suggest hidden tensions or conflicts. During their inquiry, the name Luke Harper repeatedly surfaced. Luke was a young administrative assistant at the church, responsible for managing schedules, correspondence, and events. Witnesses described Luke as a close confidant of Martin's, noting that the two often spent time together outside of work hours. This relationship, while seemingly professional, raised eyebrows due to its perceived intensity and frequency. Investigators dug deeper into Luke's background and his interactions with Martin. Emails and text messages between the two revealed a pattern of communication that extended beyond work matters. The messages, while not overtly incriminating, hinted at a level of intimacy that suggested a personal relationship. Additionally, multiple witnesses reported seeing Martin and Luke meeting privately on several occasions, often in secluded locations. Holloway brought Luke in for questioning. Initially cooperative, Luke admitted to having a close relationship with Martin but insisted it was purely platonic. He explained the frequent meetings as discussions about church operations and denied any knowledge of conflicts or secrets that might have led to Martin's death. When pressed about his whereabouts on the night before the body was found, Luke provided an alibi, claiming he had been at a friend's house watching a movie. His alibi was later confirmed by multiple witnesses, forcing investigators to rule him out as a suspect. Despite these setbacks, the investigation continued to uncover fragments of Martin's life that painted a more complex picture of the man behind the pulpit. Financial records revealed minor discrepancies in church accounts, though not significant enough to suggest embezzlement or fraud. Forensic analysis of Martin's phone and laptop uncovered encrypted files that hinted at a private side of his life, but these proved difficult to access without further technical support. Meanwhile, forensic evidence from the garage provided limited insight. The bloodstains on the workbench and floor were confirmed to be Martin's, but there were no foreign fingerprints or DNA present at the scene. The chemical odor was traced to a cleaning solvent found in the garage, though it appeared to have been spilled accidentally rather than used to obscure evidence. The abrasions on Martin's hands and the scattered tools suggested a struggle, but there was no indication of another person's involvement. As days turned into weeks, the investigation grew increasingly complex. Each lead, no matter how promising, seemed to unravel under scrutiny. The community's initial shock began to give way to speculation and rumors, with theories ranging from a botched burglary to a secret vendetta. Despite the mounting pressure, Holloway remained determined to uncover the truth. He knew that somewhere within the web of lies and half-truths, the key to solving Martin's death was waiting to be found. For now, however, the case remained a puzzle, its pieces scattered and incomplete. As the investigation into Martin Grayson's death progressed, the pressure mounted on everyone involved, particularly Jason. The police's methodical questioning and their focus on the relationships in Martin's personal life created an atmosphere of unease within the Grayson household. Jason, already grappling with guilt and fear, found it increasingly difficult to maintain his composure. Every new development in the investigation brought him closer to breaking point. Detective Holloway and his team had narrowed their focus to the people closest to Martin, piecing together fragments of his hidden life. The evidence pointing to Martin's secret relationship with Luke Harper had become impossible to ignore, and the detectives believed they were on the brink of uncovering a motive for his death. Jason, realizing the police might soon unravel the truth about his relationship with Martin, began to exhibit signs of extreme distress. He withdrew further from his mother, avoided the police when they visited, and spent hours alone in his room. Eventually, Jason could no longer bear the weight of the secret. Overcome by fear and guilt, he confessed to the crime. In a tearful statement to the police, he revealed that on the night before Martin's death, he had confronted his stepfather after discovering text messages on Martin's phone that exposed his ongoing affair with Luke. Jason described how his initial shock turned into a storm of rage and betrayal. The messages confirmed his worst fear: Martin had been unfaithful, not only to Elizabeth, but to him as well. According to Jason's confession, the confrontation escalated quickly. In the garage, where Martin had retreated for solitude, Jason confronted him with the evidence of his betrayal. What began as a heated argument soon turned physical. Jason admitted to shoving Martin in a moment of rage, causing him to stumble backward into the workbench. Martin struck his head on the edge of the bench, leaving him dazed and bleeding. Jason claimed he panicked as Martin collapsed to the ground, and instead of calling for help, he fled the scene, leaving his stepfather to die. Jason's confession painted a picture of a young man overwhelmed by conflicting emotions: love, betrayal, jealousy, and anger. He described his relationship with Martin as one that had started innocently but evolved into something neither of them could fully control. The discovery of Martin's infidelity with Luke shattered the fragile bond they had built, driving Jason to an act of violence that he would later regret. Elizabeth was informed of Jason's confession shortly after his arrest. The news devastated her, leaving her grappling with the dual loss of her husband and son. Learning the full extent of Martin's secret life and his relationship with Jason shattered her perception of the man she had loved and trusted. Her idealized image of their family was irreparably destroyed, replaced by a painful reality she could barely comprehend. Jason was charged with manslaughter, and the case proceeded to trial. The courtroom proceedings drew widespread attention, as the details of Martin's hidden life and the circumstances of his death became public knowledge. The revelations tarnished Martin's reputation, casting a shadow over his legacy as a respected pastor and community leader. Elizabeth, though supportive of her son, struggled to reconcile her grief with the betrayal and lies that had defined her husband's final years. At the trial, the defense presented Jason's actions as the result of emotional turmoil and manipulation, arguing that his relationship with Martin had placed him in a vulnerable position. The prosecution, however, focused on the premeditation and severity of Jason's actions, highlighting his decision to leave Martin to die rather than seeking help. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Jason guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to a term in a juvenile correctional facility, given his age and lack of prior offenses. In the aftermath, Elizabeth chose to leave Savannah, unable to face the constant reminders of her shattered family and the public scandal that surrounded Martin's death. The church, once a pillar of the community, faced significant fallout, with members divided over the revelations about their former pastor. Martin Grayson's name, once synonymous with integrity and faith, became a cautionary tale of hidden lives and the destructive power of secrets.